Great. I think we're ready to start. So welcome to our proxy panel on proxy technology. And look, I think let's start by maybe if I could ask everybody to introduce themselves. Jason, will you start?
Hi, I'm Jason GRAD. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Massive. We're an ethical web data collection company. We specialize in proxy infrastructure, both residential and ISP. And our other specialties are performance, pricing, and ethics.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ovi. It's the easier way to pronounce my name. I am the business development director for Server Factory. We are basically IPv4 brokers. We provide IPs from all over the world for all kinds of proxy usage and also servers because it's in the name. So that's pretty much it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vlad. I'm the proxy department manager at Pubconcierge. We've been in the IPv4 industry for over 12 years now, owning a large number of IPs, currently turning into a one-stop shop for anyone using the resource for their main core business.
Hi, everybody. I'm the founder, CEO of EMEIGH. We're a 45-person proxy and scraping company of 6 awesome people over here to my left. We sell the whole gambit between DC proxies, Resi, ISP, up to scraping APIs. So I hope today to share a little bit more about what trends we're seeing in that regard. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Thanks, Neil. And look, you all sell IPs, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how you go about sourcing them. Jason, do you want to kick off?
Sure. We started as a residential proxy company. And we always have focused on getting 100% consent from our users and taking an ethical approach. The basis of the company at Massive was that we were trying to solve a different problem that led us here of how do people get paid and pay for services online. And we thought of Massive as a way that users could opt in and get free stuff or get paid directly in exchange for some of their idle computing resources instead of trading personal data, watching annoying, intrusive ads, or paying with a card. And so that's the basis of how the company started. And so all of our users come from our own apps and from our partners who use our SDK. They have to comply with strict standards for showing kind of understandable text to users. There has to be consent. There has to be opt-in and out at any time for users. And then we protect users by being pretty restrictive in terms of kind of blocking a bunch of domains that we wouldn't really want to be run on our machines.
Right. Well, our sourcing takes a little bit of a different kind of approach. It's not that it's not ethical because it's not really on the table. We are mostly oriented on a profit-based kind of scheme. So our sourcing team is basically 15 people aged between 18 to 45, which basically talk to every single supplier they find in the world. And we use this approach that we have a lot of people of different ages because they can approach all kinds of IP providers. You're never going to find, in our experience, you're never going to find the 18-year-old that's going to be able to talk to the 50-year-old ISP provider with words like, you know, whatever they use now, mid or lit or that sort of stuff, right? So we found out that having like a broad array of people that talk to each an individual supplier, that's kind of like how we do our sourcing. Old school people running.
This is purchasing IPv4 IP addresses.
Yeah, purchase. It's leasing. It's leasing. And different, obviously different suppliers have different lease plans and all that, but it's leasing. It's not outright purchasing.
Yeah.
So we rely predominantly here at Pubconcierge for the IPs that we own. So we focus on a large number of IPs that we've been had grabbed our holds on for, I think, about 12 years now. But with those IPs, at a certain point, you reach some peak that you can't do the same projects every time. So we managed to find ways in which we can make those IPs look new, whether that's by territory, by use case, or by type of IP. And we're going to elaborate more a bit further down into how we do that as well.
Yeah, I'll talk on the residential side. There may be a lot of people here who do the data scraping and you use proxies, but you don't actually maybe understand what's going on when you're using those proxies in the residential space. There's many ways you can source an IP address. A residential is your phone. You can have a proxy installed on your phone, and a scraper can come use that. Obviously, what the techies in here may assume is that gets into the world of gray area and black hat area of installing malware across millions of devices to make this big residential network. And so when we talk about consent for residential devices, what Jason was saying a bit about is we have our app that users can install. The user installs it and says, yes, I agree. I want to be a proxy. I want to be compensated for that. I understand what that means. There's somebody who's going to use me to come scrape. So that's how we kind of define ethical sourcing.
And I think Rayobyte were, if you hope you don't mind me saying, Neil, relatively late into building out your own residential network. Was ethics part of your reason for this delay? Was that something you were very concerned about?
Yeah. I mean, we were late to the game. We were always watching it, and at the time I was too naive, unfortunately. But I looked at it and I said, how the heck can the big players get millions of devices? The only way that I could come up with is malware or shady ways sneaking it in. And obviously, over time, we watch the market enough, and we see that there's a way to do that with the app-based approach. But we get approached by people who want to install our SDK on all kinds of crazy cases. We had one last year. He said he had a relationship with an OEM TV manufacturer, and he said, I'll install your proxy on your smart TV, and we'll just put out hundreds of thousands of TVs, and now you get these proxies. And we said, well, that's not the game we're gonna be playing. Sorry, we don't want that. But
yeah, and that's very different than having a smart TV app that you're using that says, hey, do you want the equivalent of Netflix without ads in exchange for some of your bandwidth, your IP address that'll be used for public web data collection? That's totally different than in extreme cases, because I don't think people in this room might understand totally where these could come from in some cases. Hey, we put it in our terms in Mandarin for our light bulbs that we're installing, and all users are automatically opted in because they bought the thing. When they purchased it, they said yes to the terms. Or smart TVs, like you're saying, we get all kinds of companies coming to us that we have to deny a partnership because they just want to get this on devices. And unfortunately, that's kind of where some of this industry started. But it sounds like a lot of us are working on paving a way toward doing this ethically.
Cool, thanks, Jason. And look, in the last year, a year ago, Isaac from Rayobyte gave a talk on the death of data center. He's down there. It's a great talk, Isaac. Thank you. Has that trend continued, Neil? Has it played out like you thought it would?
yes, absolutely. Isaac's talk, just a quick summary, is what we believe and what we see in the market is that data center IPs as static IPs are much more easily identifiable to especially large tech companies. Like, there's a static IP that consistently hits me, and it hits me 24 hours a day. Let's ban it. Whereas a residential device, not only can they can detect and say, yeah, I think that's bot, but they have to make a choice. If I ban this residential IP, I'm also banning the consumer who pays me money. And so big companies have this kind of cat and mouse. And what we see, we've seen develop more and more in the last 12 months is this trend of small to large enterprise customers. They'll downgrade on DC and they'll increase in their resi. So we're seeing it, but nevertheless, DC is still very prevalent across many use cases.
And one for the rest of the panel, have you seen something similar? Any other trends in IP types?
Well, I was going to say that in the past 12 months, for me as a broker, we've actually seen an increase in the requests for DCIPs from our partners. And I'm not really sure exactly why. It might be because they're banned all the time and you need to replace them all the time, which might sound bad, but if you're in the brokerage business, it's actually quite good, because you can actually put up some schemes where you could develop a longer payment plan and prepayments and all that. So the death of DC kind of like helped us in the past year by actually making them a bit more expensive, and by actually sourcing them easier and at a larger volume, for us at least.
Yeah, and one more thing that just as an IP owner that we found that we managed to do with DC is upgrade them per se. So a static data center IP is just represented by a static IP and a static data center ASN. Whereas if you combine the two and switch them, so have the data center IP with the ISP level ASN, it gives them a bit more better reputation, what we call here at Pubconcierge as hybrids. Whereas where data centers wouldn't work, in some use cases, having this data center IP where with an ISP level ASN can start unblocking it and work pretty much at the same level as an ISP level in some cases.
So what you're saying is you're seeing some of the data center traffic move over to ISP IPs or those hybrid IPs that you guys have.
100%.
Yeah, and Jason.
We had such a great demand for ISP proxies, otherwise known as static residential, because you are taking, IP addresses that are meant for residential users and assigning them to a telecom carrier. Just like would happen for kind of an internet service provider. We saw such demand and that's why we decided to acquire an ISP infrastructure company and launch that product. And even with the 20,000 ISP IPs we launched in the first month, we sold out of a huge amount of inventory of the domains that we can run on those IPs within weeks. And so I think, it's pretty fun to be in an expanding industry, because even if residential is gaining traction because of blocks or detection, there's kind of a lot of growth for all types of IP addresses. It really depends on kind of your use case and your own experience as a potential partner for what works and doesn't work. And it could change with a certain domain where, DC worked and that didn't work, and then you switch to ISP, and then you switch to residential, but maybe you figure something out that lets you do it in a less expensive way and kick back to DC and kind of rotate through whatever works to optimize for quality or for success and cost.
And just on the residential versus ISP, have you found their effectiveness? Are they somewhat comparable, or would you say one is more effective than others, assuming they both work for a given use case?
It's a very complex question, simply because in some situations, even residential type of ISPs, I think can mix them with the static ISPs and have the same results. And even when they rotate them, so you have a rotating pool and you add static ISPs to the same pool, you would get the same results. I think it very much depends on the use case of those IPs. They both can have the same results. I think it's just a more important question: how do you use them? Like, do you know how to put those IPs in motion? Do you know how to send the request from them? Do you know the limit you need to put on them based on the website that you're targeting and on the firewalls that the websites are having? So it very much depends on the vertical you're in, the usage that you want to, and how fast you, and very important question, how fast you want those results. The more in a rush you are, the faster you're gonna get burned. So people have different strategies in ways, the very common word, that warm up the IPs before you actually use them, so you don't get banned just as easily.
Can I pitch in on this? I completely agree with you on this, but from a different kind of angle. I agree with you. It all depends on the strategy, because whenever we lease ISP IPs, every now and then, some of them, and this isn't making our partners happy, and that when that happens, some of them turn to DC. They change their geolocation, they turn to DC IPs, and we tried to transform them back, and we're pretty successful in that. The thing is, we don't always notify when that happens. We just get straight to work, and it takes them 15, 30 days, 45 days until they're back to their original state. In that period, they're still usable, and they still have the same exact results for the client. As long as they not really notice it, because we're on it. And the second they figure out, okay, well, they're not ISP anymore, they're DCs, they're not working as good. I think it's also a case of teaching your partners how to actually process them and how to actually use them as such, because that's we see value both in ISP and DC IPs.
A few people have mentioned teaching your partners how to use them. What do you think are the main bits of advice you'd like to give people? What are the common mistakes they tend to make?
Sure, I'll jump in on that. I think probably the most important thing that I tell to all my clients is to test what you get. You find yourself a reliable partner that gives you the option, even for 1 hour, 2 hour, 1 day, depending on the project that you're in, just to see the IPs that he's about to get. Build the trust and the foundation with that partner before you jump in on a higher project. And this benefit us, especially because we own such a large pool of IPs ourselves, in the case that we know sometimes IPs don't work, but that doesn't mean we stop there. If it doesn't work, let me get you brand new ones until you find the ones that works for you best.
I think that's a bit of advice actually that came back from everybody on this panel, is that any vendor should work with you, especially if you have a large enough use case, to prove it on a realistic sample of your traffic. So I just honestly wouldn't recommend working with anybody who doesn't do that. And quite often it may not necessarily work 100% the first time, but all of us will give you hands-on help to actually make sure that you solve that problem. So that's a really top bit of advice for anybody who's shopping around. Would anybody else have anything else to add, Neil?
I'll add just from a perspective of asking yourself what type of proxy I should use. The way we kind of tell people, and we talked about it last year as well, is we see a lot of customers who don't know, and so they choose residential, and residential is the most expensive. Well, mobile proxies, but it's not the most prevalent. So residential proxies are charged per gigabyte of traffic, and it's the easiest because you just get to throw a bunch of requests at a huge pool of IPs, and you get guaranteed success. But your bill is typically, in most cases, going to be much higher than if you choose ISP or DC. And so when we start educating and creating that awareness for customers, they're looking internally and saying, okay, do we want to manage our own DC ISP proxy pools and rotate between them and have the right cooldowns and the right rate limits so they don't get banned, detecting a band? If they say yes and they have the resources to do that, then that's when DC and ISP is a great choice because the cost will be so much lower. But for some companies, it's not their core business. And so a lot of times it's just like, I don't want to worry about any of that. And therefore, I'm willing to pay a little bit premium for a rotating residential pool.
I've seen so much of this now, and so many times where, for example, we can have ISP proxies with zero fraud scoring, or any vendor could, and it may or may not work for a certain use case, even though everything looks good from your analytics. And we have people do all kinds of tests. Some do, tests where they'll run a huge amount of requests against some kind of IP database and score them and get the latency, and that's how they make their decision. And other clients will actually throw it into some testing or into production. And so at Massive, we give pretty extensive trials because we really want to understand, how to be helpful up front and not have this come up later. And we want our, future clients to be throwing their production traffic on our infrastructure and make sure that it works, and communicate that with us and let us help in terms of coming up with the appropriate mix from what we've seen of, okay, well, you could use, ISP or DC or residential or mobile for these parts of your traffic depending on how you're trying to optimize. So we recommend people throw real amounts of production traffic on our infrastructure, let it run, get the results, communicate with us, and let us help you optimize for success.
Cool. And you mentioned fraud scoring as well, Jason. I know this is probably not something that everybody would do when they purchase proxies, but it's certainly something I think everybody on this panel does. Maybe you want to just give us a bit of an insight into the approach you take for that, what you need to check.
Yes, so we, at Massive, we have kind of analytics running constantly on our own network and different types of networks that we run at the company. We use, the hard thing or the interesting thing about fraud scoring is that it doesn't always determine the effectiveness for a network for your use case. And so that's why you really should, test extensively with potential vendors that you want to work with. But the way that we do it is there are different IP databases, there are different fraud scoring databases. IPQS is one that we use extensively, and we're constantly testing. I see some nods. Maybe IPQS isn't the best one. So if you have a question or a comment about that, we can test us in a number of ways. We want the feedback, but we're constantly testing our network against different types of databases to see what the fraud scoring is as one indicator of how our network might perform. And we know what to see from a real residential network or from a real partner and their app, and what that traffic should look like on kind of the macro. Are these real devices that are coming into the network that are being opted in? And so we look pretty strictly at this just to make sure that things are working in a way consistent with how we expect them to. But again, I would really test production levels of traffic on whatever network you're trying, and the results might be surprising to you regardless of the IPQS or whatever MaxMind database that you're using to check.
And just to add on top of that, so this is a true story, and I think I had this conversation with the CEO of IPQS, I think last year, that it's part of the education process that we have to deal with our clients, because they, let's say, pass the IPs afterwards to the end clients, and the end client, first thing he does, he goes to IP databases, goes to IP quality score and checks it out, and he sees score 65, score 90, whatever the score is. That's not necessarily reliable, and that's not quoting me, that's literally quoting the CEO of IPQS, so that's a different story. Simply because in order to get the accurate value and fraud score of that IP, first of all, you need to have an account with them. So the one that's free and you check, that's not necessarily accurate, it's just simple information that they put out. And second of all, they only start banning after a very high number, so that number is very hardly reached anyway in the type of the business that we're in. So that's why, again, just to confirm what Jason said as well, it's very important just to test the traffic rather than the information from the internet. That's not necessarily always accurate.
Yeah, I would agree. Jason is spot on this, and there's so many ways you can go about it. Like what Vlad said is basically the bad hype that our partners think of. So, that's red. That's red in IPQS. You need to have it green in Scamalytics. You need to do that. You need to IP data. Okay, look, just test. No, but I'm sure our clients are not gonna. All right, just test. And I'm assuming it's a bit easier for you guys because you're a bit of a different kind of angle. But when you're coming in as a broker and you're trying to convince them that they're good, you sound like a used car salesman, right? It's like you just want to do the sale and whatnot. And it's a bit difficult to try to convince them that, no, man, just try it out. Figure it out, and then it's gonna work eventually. It's not just some sales tricks. We're all in this trying to figure it out together.
And of course, besides just the quality of the IPs, the other big aspect is geolocation, and it's very well. It's something I think anybody who's used IPs for web scraping has struggled with at some point. So maybe I can ask either you, Vlad, or you, Ovi, to talk through a little bit about how geolocation works first, and then how you go about solving this.
Well, from my point of view, geolocation is something that I send to my acquisitions team, and they talk directly to their suppliers. They put the IPs they announce on a certain ASN in this particular country. They put the IPs in the geo feed, and then they're in constant contact with the databases, MaxMind, IPT location. They know the schedule. They know when the 1st, the 15th of the month when the IP is going to change. MaxMind on Fridays, all that. And you would think it would work, but it can work 3 months, and in the 4th month, neither database is gonna work at all. So what we do is we put them in the entire process, and we try to have a ranking of the most important database. So IP2 location would be like the first, and they say, okay, let's get this ready, and until the other databases are ready, you start using the IPs. And a lot of the times, you get them, the way you want them. You get an IP from Portugal to transform into Austria, for instance, but at some point it's gonna start coming back to its roots, whatever you're trying to do. And that is the point when you gotta talk to your partner and figure out, okay, am I gonna go on with this, or do I need a replacement, or do I need to go to the geo feed again? So to me, it's just basically, I need these IPs, my partner need this, you're 15 guys, figure it out. It's my mission to do damage control and to talk with my partners to see how we can, smooth things over for the next 40 to 45 days. That's from my point of view.
Yeah, wouldn't have too much to add on top of that. I think it's just a case, especially to our clients, and this is where we tell them, when it comes to geolocation, there's a lot of databases that we have to rely on. No one owns all of them. There's one company that owns every single separate database. So we used to have 4 major databases, now you have 10, 12, 15, 20, and it keeps growing every day. And let's say, for example, last year, Google was a big trend. So Google had the problem with the geolocation because you have to send separate geolocation requests to Google. Now Google has direct link to MaxMind, which helps, obviously. So if I automatically geolocate in MaxMind, Google will automatically geolocate as well. It's a case of people understanding that they mess up, because sometimes they mess up without any reason whatsoever, change from one country to another. It's then our mission to try and tell them and do a damage control as fast as possible, but it's not always up to us. It's just a case of putting pressure on them, basically.
I think it might be interesting because I found this fascinating when I learned how it worked, and we're in this business too, but one of you two might be like the expert to talk about it, to actually educate everyone in a few sentences about how the geolocation works, like how these databases get updated and whether it works based on like list based or based on trace routes, because it's really works kind of counterintuitively to how you would think.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try and keep as much summed up as I can. When we first started geolocating, it was just a manual request. People would just have to go to IP location, maximize DBIP. Hey, this IP has changed. Please update it. What they would do then, they would just check the trace route. So it was just as simple as finding out where the final ping stops and if the server that was in pointed out to the same country that you requested. Now, thankfully, probably due to a lot of people like myself and Ovi just sending thousands of requests every month to them to change from different country to different type of IP, they got bored of us. And they found a really fast way of doing it. And the fast way of doing it is a geofeed link. What the geofeed link does, it's a link you send to those databases to update the information from. The information being very standard, meaning city, state, zip codes, country, and I think that's it. I think those are the most important ones. When you give those links to those databases, you pretty much stop talking to them about it whatsoever. They just do that every update that they have, let's say IP2 location on the 15th every month or the 30th every month. They would just automatically update the database based on the CSV file link they have on record, basically.
I would also add that the trace route is also a bit of an important thing, because because you kind of need to have the IP reflect that it's from that particular country. So if you have an ASN in that particular country and you route it and you announce it on that and you route it on a bare metal server that has an specific country IP, that's gonna help even more. And to oversimplify what Vlad basically said, is you're trying to make an IP and move it in another country. It's like you're moving into another country, and if you stay for like 3, 4, 5, or 6 months, you start looking like the people in those countries. This is what we're trying to do with the IPs. Just put them over there, make them look like it's in that particular city, that particular SN, as if it never left. So this is in simple terms, this is what we're trying to do. Pinpointing it, moving it exactly in the spot that we want, and hopefully it will stay that way for however long our partners need it.
Cool. And I'll add on to that as well. Look, people who are using this for web scraping, sometimes in your code you can actually check what the website thinks as a backdoor, because no matter how good these guys are at making sure the proxy is geolocated in some areas, there's always going to be some room for error. Look, I might start taking some questions from the app first. How much does the ethical approach actually affect clients of your proxy service?
Unfortunately, I would say I don't see too many customers caring as much as they should, which is, not where we should be or would want to be. But they should. At the end of the day, if you're using a proxy provider that doesn't have an ethical stance, not just liability is the question for Sanaya, but how that flows through, whether you're using a proxy provider who's using malware to acquire the IP addresses, who's liable for that? Are you knowing of that? Are you playing the arm's length card? At the end of the day, it's unethical, whether it's legal or not.
I can chime in. Sure. Yeah, I wish clients cared more, because then it would force all companies to take the ethical approach, especially on residential sourcing. Maybe at some point something will change where they have to take the ethical approach. At the end of the day, to win business and to maintain business, we need to be one of the most performant networks across important categories and have high success rates for client requests. But at Massive, there's what's legal and there's what's right. And everyone on the team is trained to do what's right.
Interesting question here. Are the unethical proxy companies causing active harm to people? I think particularly the consumer who unknowingly gives away their IP to be used by running something that acts as a proxy.
Yeah, because you can assume the company who's acquiring IPs, whether in the gray area, unethical or illegal way, they're also going to be the type of company who's going to sell to people who are doing, again, gray area or black hat hacking, brute force DDoSing, being in the illegal and the unethical area. You get into things like ad clicking and so on and so forth.
And look, I assume there's some stuff in the middle as well, which may not necessarily be considered unethical, but you may not want it on your device, like adult content in some areas. And do you protect your customers for this?
Yeah, we block 5 million or so domains by default, including adult content, gambling, finance sites, and a number of categories on our restricted list. And you have to basically be a bank or a cybersecurity company that KYC's in order to access some of that. Obviously, adult content we're just not allowing for anyone because that's extremely sensitive, and there's kind of laws against this in certain parts of the world. And kind of to touch on the first note, we don't know all the repercussions of doing the bad things because we've always done the right thing, so we haven't. And it's hard enough to do the right things with antivirus companies and other types of compliance organizations and huge companies that are very protective, Google and Microsoft. So I don't know all of the repercussions. There's already repercussions for trying to do it the right way. But there's botnets have a very long history of lots of malicious behavior. And so again, if you're on the right side of this and you do happen to be, because the activity can just look like it's unwanted no matter what, even if you're doing it the right way to a big company like Google with some heuristic detection. But if you're doing them the right way and you contact those companies, it's much easier to get something resolved than if you're not.
And how do people know which IP companies are ethical?
I'm going to say this in the point of view of a IPv4 owner. So as they do, we do this sort of KYC ourselves with our clients. So we block domains, we test to make sure that the IPs that we have and given to the clients didn't have a bad reputation beforehand, and that's where we want also our clients to test them before that as well. We speak with all the databases and all the, let's say, government agencies that we've had collaborations with in the past to make sure that we didn't have any abuses coming in the past of any sort for that matter. However, there's one thing that I have to say. It's a constant job for both my compliance and legal team to stay ahead of the game, which is not always the case. Like, we've had situations where we block domains and we keep updating that list every month, but sometimes something pops up. Someone does something really bad that we were not prepared, we didn't expect, we didn't know how they did it and how they got there. And we take actions reactively rather than proactively on that situation, but then we make sure it just never happens again. And having someone that always protects both the client and the resources that they have, I guess, is the win-win package deal for anyone getting IPv4 resources in the market.
Yeah, sorry, I have one up on that. Because we're brokers and we don't own the IPs, we don't actually have access to abuse emails because they are at the supplier's discretion. So if something happens in May 2022 and it's sent an email to the supplier's email and it's in a spam folder, he checks it after who knows how long and then comes to us like 2 years later or something, we're very reactive when it comes to that. So that's a bit of a vulnerability from us. We block domains, we do that, we do all kinds of stuff. But when it comes to an actual abuse getting through, the first one that hears it is not us, even though we have a compliance department. It's not us because the abuse is sent directly to the supplier. Most 99% of the suppliers, said, I got this, what's this? Oh my God, cybersecurity, I'm gonna die, all that. It's not really gonna happen. But when there's no communication, that's when it gets really bad. If you get like 5 months when the supplier doesn't talk to you because he's on a year-long lease, doesn't really care, and then he pops open the inbox and sees abuses, he basically wants to kill you. And you're trying to not make that happen. And going back 6 months is pretty bad, especially with your partners. You gotta go backtrack and say, well, wait, why didn't you tell me then, and all that. So it is a bit of a situation like that. We try to put the abuse email us or the partners, but that changes the quality of the IPs because it's no longer coming from that particular source. So it's a bit of a thin line, that one.
With residential, we kind of have an idea of what we expect to see for a normal user from some of the IP scoring sites, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily like abusive behavior. We expect that 90% plus of a residential network is scored as kind of a residential device or appears as a residential device, people use VPNs. This happens. Some percentage, a small percentage of users. We expect, I think the high fraud score from IPQS, for example, is like 90 and above. Okay, 90 or 95 and above is a high fraud score. It means something has been going on in some device. We expect less than 40% of our residential network to have a high fraud score. Hopefully we can do even better. We're pretty strict on this, and you can see this on like Proxy Way reports, how they benchmark. So when we see an app partner and they've got tons of VPN activity, or if they have like a high percentage of devices that have had abuse, it just stands out to us. It might be abusive. It might be that they've just been slamming these IP addresses with traffic from a bunch of other proxy infrastructure companies, for example, in which case they might not be as useful. But either way, whether it's abusive or they're kind of overused, it looks fishy to us. We know it's going to not only maybe be in line with our values, but also not be as useful to our clients. And so that's the kind of behavior that we would kind of restrict.
And how would you, like, what kind of KYC do you do in your customers, or what kind of ongoing monitoring of your residential network do you do to avoid one of your customers actually doing something that you wouldn't be happy with?
Well, we're all, on the customer side, we're all enterprise, so we know all of our customers. And on the partner side, we manually KYC. We check all of their consent screens. We do spot checks and continue to check their consent screens. If anyone doesn't abide by our terms, well, if you're a prospective client of ours, you're not going to want to use us to do shady stuff because you're going to get, unauthorized access. You're not going to be able to do it. So go somewhere else. We're not a good partner for that. If you're a partner doing something malicious or that we find out about, we immediately will end the terms and you can't use our SDK. We're not going to pay you for users or anything like that. And then for monitoring, we're constantly monitoring with IP scoring sites. So we have internal dashboards that are showing us every day the update from like a huge random sample of our network so that we could see what's going on. I don't want to be surprised by a client finding this before I do, or a future client finding this before I do. I want to know and try to remediate the behavior as soon as possible.
I could share it from we work with enterprise consumers, and our KYCs, we use SumSub as one of the big KYC providers, and for clients that go above a certain number of requests, which is like really, really small, they have to then KYC with a whole passport. We have a passport photo, they meet with our compliance officer, and we get all their information, and then we have our compliance officer is watching the top customers every day to see, are they still using the same domains and use case that they said they were going to in the interview process, and we just do that day in, day out.
Cool. Yeah, it seems the proxy market is crowded and highly competitive. How do so many companies survive and thrive in this environment? Is it because the market's growing? What are you guys seeing?
I think Ian said it best, that the market's booming and it's only going to get bigger as AI and the use of LLMs and data grows. So as data scrapers, as this is the Extract Summit, we're in a good place, I think.
I'm just going to share it from a owner of IPv4 point of view. So we've seen an increase in the proxy market, which means the demand for IPv4 resources, and I'm going to underline IPv4 resources, not IPv6, because IPv6 still has a long way to go before you can reach this level. It's in high demand. People find more and more use cases in which they can use IPv4 resources. More and more companies and verticals are jumping in the IPv4 business. So I think we're just at the beginning. This is just the starting point.
What really makes me happy as a broker is that my partners keep the IPs for a very long time, which is an absolute gold mine for us. We're good with the increase that we see year over year. I'm going to share with you a little secret. When we started at first, our first 4 months were in email marketing. So we had no idea about proxy. So we did email marketing, and it was great to get an IP and then sell it 5 times the price. So that was awesome. Vlad was going to retire on an island or something. And after 2 months, we got listed and everything got really, really bad. So we had to shut that operation out. Now we have IPs that have been leased out for the past 3 years. And everything has been growing. And to be in such a business where you're a broker and you can settle your entire next year knowing that these are going to be renewed, this is like the best mindfulness exercise you can ever have when it comes to like the fiscal year or something. So yeah, I would agree with both of them. But from this point of view, it is with all the problems that databases and stuff appears, it still feels to me as well that it's growing, and it has been growing for the past year, and it doesn't feel like it stops growing.
Yeah, and despite kind of stock market going up, or the U.S. stock market going up, that's mostly carried by the Mag 7, or the largest companies that have overweight position in the market. And so it's kind of been a bad market. The macro environment has been tough, and the proxy and scraping markets are growing. And so it's nice when there's a growing market, there's less competitive pressure. It allows us all to be here together, even though a lot of us are competitors, we're also collaborating. So it seems like a great room to be in. We're all in the right business, and it's nice to be. We'll see how market dynamics change, but it's nice to be in an industry where you can kind of work with a huge amount of different, like I said, competitors up and down the value chain.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd thing sometimes as well. There's this collaboration plus competition. But no, it's great to have everybody here together now, and you guys aren't killing each other on the panel. We're all friends. So there was a... so yeah, look, so somebody asked a question, what do you mean by fraud? And how is it calculated? So maybe you could, maybe one for Vlad. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So just to give you a quick perspective, there's two main websites that calculate the fraud of an IP. One's called Scamalytics, one's called IP Quality Score. One predominantly focused on the quality of the IP, the other one predominantly focused on the quality and the traffic of the ASN. So all the IPs announced on the same ASN. IP Quality Score doesn't have a certain 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 ratio fraud score. It's very random. It's very, very random. Predominantly, you would see from 0 to 38 to 65 to 90 or above. It's usually those marks that IP Quality Score usually offers. 0, I'm not going to lie, I can't remember the last time I've seen a 0 in the market. It's simply because that's how random the website scores. Let me give you an example. If I have IPs announced on British Telecom and I wanted to move them to Virgin Media in the UK, as soon as I announced them and switch ASNs, the IP would go from 0 to 65 instantly, just because I switched the ASN. So they're just triggers on the database that they would use just to flag in case something does happen to that IPv4 address. So as the guy at IP Quality Score said, it's a case of making sure that bad stuff doesn't happen on that IP address, and they start setting up certain triggers just to make sure certain actions do happen that raises an alert on their side, but not on any other website. And it doesn't affect the business anyway, which is a score of 38 and 65. What is 90 and above, that's when people get a bit suspicious. And that's when their triggers for the websites that partnered up with IP Quality Score starts blocking that certain IP address. And that's why, again, I'm going to emphasize on the fact that it's important to test the resources that you're getting, simply because the database that you're searching or have been familiar with in the past may not be relatable anymore.
Cool, thanks for that. And listen, I think we're up on time, so listen, big round of applause for our proxy panel.
Yeah.